A little child, born to be king, is forced to run for his life in the middle of the night, escaping from a wicked ruler. He grows up in Africa, where he hears strange stories of gods with animal heads, pyramids built by giants, and rivers that never run dry. In silence, he watches, learns, and waits, until the day comes when the whole world will know his name. As he steps into the Jordan River, a voice from heaven speaks, and everything changes forever. Please watch to the end, listen carefully, and subscribe to be part of Christ's family. Here is the story in full. The night air was cool, but Joseph was sweating. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up, his breath quick and uneven. The dream had been so real, too real. An angel had appeared to him, shining like fire, his voice full of urgency. "Joseph, get up. Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Herod wants to kill him." Matthew 2 verse 13. Joseph swung his legs over the side of the small sleeping mat, his hands shaking. The words of the angel repeated over and over in his mind. Herod wants to kill him. Just the day before, Joseph had heard rumors in the marketplace. People whispered that the great King Herod had been troubled, deeply troubled. Strange visitors from the east, Magi who studied the stars, had arrived in Jerusalem asking about a newborn king of the Jews. They had seen his star in the sky and had traveled far to worship him. Matthew 2 verses 1 to 2. Herod had been furious. A new king? A threat to his throne? Joseph had not known what to make of the rumors, but now the angel's warning made everything clear. Herod had made up his mind. He would not allow another king to rise. He would kill Jesus. Joseph did not hesitate. He turned to where Mary lay, sleeping beside their newborn son. Gently, he touched her shoulder. "Mary! Mary, wake up!" She stirred, opening her eyes slowly. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "We must leave. Now." Mary sat up, sensing the urgency in his voice. "Why? What happened?" Joseph leaned in close, lowering his voice as if the walls had ears. "An angel came to me. We have to go to Egypt. Herod is coming. He wants to kill Jesus." Mary gasped, immediately turning to her baby, who was wrapped snugly in a cloth beside her. Jesus slept peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding him. Mary pressed a hand to her chest, her mind racing. Egypt. The land of pharaohs. A land far from home. How would they get there? How would they survive? But there was no time to ask questions. They had to move. Joseph grabbed a small sack, stuffing it with what little food they had, some dried figs, a bit of bread, and a skin of water. He took the few coins he had and tucked them deep into his belt. Then, carefully, he lifted Jesus into his arms, cradling him close. "Come," he said to Mary, his voice steady but firm. "We must go now." Mary nodded, wrapping a shawl over her head and shoulders. She knew she had no choice. If God had spoken, then they must obey. Joseph led Mary to their donkey, helping her climb onto its back. She held Jesus tightly, pressing him to her chest. Then, with one last glance at their small home in Bethlehem, Joseph took hold of the donkey's reins and stepped into the cold night. Their journey to Africa had begun. A night of fear and shadows. Bethlehem was silent, but Joseph knew the silence would not last. Somewhere in the darkness, Herod's men were moving. Soldiers trained for war. Their swords were sharp. Their orders were clear. Kill every baby boy under 2 years old. Matthew 2 verse 16. Joseph's grip tightened on the reins. They must not be found. The road ahead was long. Egypt was far away, perhaps 100 miles or more. They would have to cross desert lands, barren hills, and dangerous paths. Mary clung to Jesus, whispering a prayer. "Lord, protect us. Hide us from our enemies." The wind howled around them, and Joseph pulled his cloak tighter. Would they reach Egypt in time? Would herd soldiers catch them before they could escape? Every shadow on the road seemed to move. Every sound made Joseph's heart pound harder. A rustling in the bushes, a wild animal, or a spy. A distant clatter, falling stones, or approaching footsteps. He forced himself to stay calm. God was with them. Still, the night stretched on, and with each passing moment, Joseph knew that somewhere behind them, the massacre was about to begin. The cry of innocent blood. Back in Bethlehem, the streets were quiet, but not for long. Then came the sound of horses. The clanking of armor. The heavy footsteps of herd soldiers as they moved through the town. A baby's cry pierced the night. Then another. The peace of Bethlehem was shattered by the sound of screaming. Mothers begged for mercy. Fathers fought back, but they were no match for Herod's men. Every child, every baby boy, was torn from his mother's arms and killed without hesitation. The prophecy had been spoken long ago. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Matthew 2 verse 18. The streets ran red with innocent blood. But in the darkness, far away, one baby was safe. Jesus had escaped. A race against time. Joseph and Mary traveled all night, only stopping when they had no choice. Jesus, still just a baby, slept in his mother's arms, unaware of the danger they had left behind. The road to Egypt was harsh. By day, the sun burned hot. By night, the air turned cold. The journey seemed endless, but Joseph did not stop. He knew they had to keep going. They passed through villages, staying hidden. They avoided Roman roads, afraid that someone might recognize them. They could not trust anyone. On the third night, Mary's voice broke the silence. "Joseph," she said, "how much farther?" Joseph sighed, glancing up at the stars. He could not be sure. Egypt was close, but danger was closer. Had Herd sent men after them? Had anyone noticed their escape? He prayed in his heart. God, lead us. Hide us. Keep us safe. The donkey trudged forward. Mary clung to Jesus. Joseph pressed on. And finally, as the sun began to rise on the fifth day, the border of Egypt came into sight. Joseph exhaled, his heart pounding. They had made it. A new life in a foreign land. Stepping into Egypt felt strange. This was not their home. The streets were different. The language was different. But one thing was certain, Jesus was safe. Joseph knew they could not return to Israel until God told them it was time. But how long would they stay? Would they ever see their homeland again? For now, they had to find shelter. A place to live. A way to survive. And so, the Holy Family entered a new chapter of their lives, a chapter in a foreign land, waiting for the day when God would call them back home. But until then, Jesus, the Son of God, would grow up in Africa. And the world would never know the story of his silent years. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson as Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus crossed into Egypt. They had finally made it. Joseph sighed in relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The journey had been long and exhausting. Days of walking, sleeping under the open sky, always looking over his shoulder. But now, they had arrived. The land before them was unlike anything they had ever seen. Towering pyramids stood in the distance, their golden tips glowing in the sunlight. The mighty Nile River stretched across the land, bringing life to the fields and villages. Camels and donkeys carried merchants through busy streets. People dressed in flowing white robes spoke in a language Joseph did not understand. This was Egypt, the land of pharaohs, of kings and rulers, of wisdom and mystery. Joseph held Mary's hand as they stepped into the city. But even though Egypt was safe, it was not home. Finding a place to stay. Joseph knew they needed to find shelter. They could not live on the streets, and they could not return to Israel until God told them it was safe. But where would they go? As they walked through the marketplace, the smell of fresh bread and spices filled the air. Egyptian merchants called out to passers-by, selling baskets, jewelry, and fine cloth. But Joseph and Mary had no time to admire the city. They needed a home. Joseph approached a small shop where an old man was selling clay pots. He bowed slightly and spoke in a mix of Hebrew and broken Egyptian. "Please, sir. My family and I have come from Israel. We are looking for work and a place to stay. Do you know where we can find shelter?" The old man studied Joseph for a moment. Then he nodded. "There is a small village near the river. Many Hebrews live there. Go and ask for a man named Eliezer. He will help you." Joseph thanked him and quickly led Mary and Jesus toward the village. A new life in a foreign land. The village was quiet, surrounded by tall palm trees that swayed in the warm breeze. The houses were made of mud bricks, simple but strong. As Joseph knocked on one of the doors, a man opened it. His face was kind, and his eyes were filled with wisdom. "Are you Eliezer?" Joseph asked. The man nodded. "Yes." "And who are you?" Joseph hesitated. He could not tell the full truth. If anyone knew that his son was the promised Messiah, they could be in danger. "I am Joseph, a carpenter from Israel. My wife Mary and our child have fled from King Herod. We need a place to stay." Eliezer studied them for a moment, then smiled. "You are welcome here. Come inside." Joseph and Mary stepped inside, grateful beyond words. That night, as they lay on the straw mat provided for them, Joseph whispered to Mary, "God has led us here. We are safe." But deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. Jesus in Egypt. As the months passed, Joseph found work as a carpenter, fixing doors and making furniture. The Egyptians respected his skill, and soon he was able to provide for his family. Mary, meanwhile, took care of Jesus, watching him grow each day. And Jesus was different. Even as a child, there was something special about him. He would look at the world with deep, thoughtful eyes, as if he understood things no one else did. He watched the great Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, flowing endlessly toward the sea. He saw the pyramids, built by kings who thought they would live forever. He listened to the stories of Moses, the great prophet who had once walked this same land, who had stood before Pharaoh and called down plagues from heaven. Did Jesus know that one day, he would also stand before rulers? That one day, he would lead people from spiritual slavery into freedom? No one knew. But God's plan was unfolding. The land of great wisdom. Egypt was not just a land of great power, it was also a land of great knowledge. The Egyptians were famous for their wisdom. They studied the stars, the movement of the sun and moon. They wrote on scrolls and carved words into stone. They had great libraries filled with knowledge from all over the world. As Jesus grew, he would have heard the teachings of wise men. He would have listened to the stories of old. Even at a young age, he was already learning, thinking, understanding. Perhaps, in the quiet of the night, he would look up at the stars, the same stars that had guided the wise men from the east, and he would know. One day, I will teach the world. One day, I will be the light in the darkness. Would they ever return home? Years passed. Jesus was no longer a baby but a young boy. He ran through the streets of the village, played with other children, and helped his father in the workshop. But in Mary's heart, a question remained: would they ever return to Israel? Every night, she prayed. She longed to see Nazareth again, the land where she had grown up. But she knew they could not leave until God gave them a sign. Then, one night, Joseph had another dream. An angel appeared once more and said, "Joseph, get up. Take the child and his mother and return to the land of Israel. For those who wanted to kill the child are dead." Matthew 2 verses 19 to 20. It was a quiet place, away from the reach of kings and rulers. A place where Jesus could grow. A place where the world would forget about him for a while. The silent years begin. And so, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus left Egypt, crossing the desert once more. But this time, they were not running. They were going home. Jesus had spent his early years in Africa, growing, watching, learning. And now, he would return to the land where his mission would one day begin. For now, he was just a child. But soon, the world would hear his name again. The silent years had begun. The streets of Egypt were alive with the sounds of merchants calling out their goods, the clatter of pottery, and the laughter of children playing near the river banks. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Amidst the crowd, a young boy with dark curls and deep, thoughtful eyes walked beside his mother. Jesus was growing. He was no ordinary child. There was something different about him, something quiet yet powerful. His gaze carried wisdom beyond his years, and his presence seemed to draw people in. Joseph watched his son carefully. Though he was still young, Jesus was learning, observing, and understanding the world in ways no other child did. Learning in the land of Egypt. Egypt was a place of great knowledge. The people studied the stars, measured time, and built wonders that still stood tall after thousands of years. Though Jesus was still a child, he listened closely whenever the elders spoke. He watched the scribes as they wrote on papyrus scrolls. He saw the way the wise men of Egypt debated about life, nature, and the gods they worshipped. Joseph would take him to the market, and Jesus would observe the way people did business, the honest and the dishonest, the generous and the greedy. He saw kindness and cruelty, wisdom and foolishness. He saw the human heart. Even as a boy, Jesus seemed to understand things that others did not. Questions that had no answers. One evening, as the family sat outside their small home, Jesus looked up at Joseph and Mary with serious eyes. "Abba, who made the stars?" Joseph smiled and pointed toward the sky. "The Lord God, our Father in heaven." Jesus nodded. "Then why do the Egyptians worship other gods?" Joseph and Mary exchanged a glance. It was a hard question. "Because they do not know the one true God," Mary said softly. "They have not yet heard the truth." Jesus looked back up at the sky. "One day, they will." Joseph's breath caught in his throat. The way Jesus spoke, it was as if he knew something they did not. As if he was waiting for the right time to speak what was already written on his heart. The dream that changed everything. For years, the family lived in Egypt. Jesus grew stronger, taller, and wiser. But they always knew their stay in Egypt was temporary. One night, Joseph awoke with a start. His body was covered in sweat, his heart pounding. An angel had come to him in a dream. "Joseph, get up. Take the child and his mother and return to the land of Israel. For those who wanted to kill the child are dead." Matthew 2 verses 19 to 21. Joseph sat up, breathing heavily. He had been waiting for this moment. The time had come. They were going home. Leaving Egypt. The next morning, Joseph packed their belongings. Mary wrapped Jesus in a shawl, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. They were finally returning to Israel. The journey back was long and difficult. Once again, they crossed deserts, moving carefully through the wilderness. But this time, they were not running in fear. This time, they were walking toward destiny. But where would they go? As they neared Judea, Joseph heard troubling news. Herod's son, Archelaus, was ruling in his father's place. And he was just as dangerous. Joseph's heart sank. Could they truly return to Bethlehem? Would they be safe? Then, in another dream, God gave him an answer. Instead of settling in Judea, Joseph took his family to a quiet town in Galilee called Nazareth. Matthew 2 verses 22 to 23. A place where no one would expect to find a king. The silent years begin. Nazareth was a small village, filled with farmers, shepherds, and craftsmen. It was a place where people lived simple lives, far from the palaces of Jerusalem and the knowledge of Egypt. For the next many years, Jesus grew up here. He helped Joseph in the carpenter's shop, learning how to cut wood and build furniture. He played with the other children, running through the fields and climbing the hills. But deep inside, he was waiting. Waiting for the moment when he would step out of the shadows. Waiting for the world to know who he truly was. The hidden years had begun. And soon, the world would never be the same again. Chapter 4: The Road Back to Israel. The desert wind was harsh as Joseph, Mary, and Jesus packed their things. The time had come to leave Egypt. The journey that had once been an escape for survival was now a return home. Joseph tightened the straps on their donkey and looked at Mary. She held Jesus close, her eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. They had lived in Egypt for years, but Israel was their true home. With the sun rising behind them, they stepped onto the road that would lead them back to the land of their ancestors. But danger still lurked ahead. The path they could not take. As they neared Israel, Joseph kept listening for news. He needed to know if it was safe to return to Bethlehem, where Jesus had been born. But what he heard troubled him deeply. Herod's son, Archelaus, was now ruling in Judea. And he was just as cruel as his father. The people of Israel feared him, for he ruled with an iron fist. Joseph's heart pounded. Bethlehem was in Judea. If they returned there, Jesus would still be in danger. That night, as he lay under the stars, Joseph had another dream. An angel appeared once more, whispering the answer he needed. Go to Galilee. And so, Joseph obeyed. Instead of going to Bethlehem, he led his family to Nazareth, a quiet town far from the reach of kings and rulers. Matthew 2 verses 22 to 23. They had arrived at the place where Jesus would grow up. Nazareth, the hidden years begin. Nazareth was small, a simple village filled with farmers, shepherds, and craftsmen. It was not a place of power or importance. No prophets had ever come from Nazareth. No one expected anything great to come from there. But God had chosen this place for his son. Joseph found work as a carpenter, building tables, doors, and yokes for oxen. Jesus, now a young boy, watched and learned. His small hands held the rough wood. He felt the weight of the hammer. He saw how his father measured each piece with patience and skill. Day by day, Jesus grew stronger. But inside him, something greater was also growing. Jesus, the carpenter with a secret. For many years, Jesus lived like any other young man in Nazareth. He worked with Joseph, helping to build houses and furniture for their neighbors. To the people of Nazareth, he was just a carpenter's son. But those who looked closely saw something different. His eyes held a wisdom beyond his years. His words carried a quiet power. His presence brought peace to those around him. Yet, no one knew what was coming. Even Mary, who had once heard the angel's words, wondered in her heart. When would the time come? When would her son step into his true purpose? For now, he remained hidden. 18 years of silence. The Bible tells us little about these years. From the age of 12 to 30, Jesus lived in Nazareth. He did not seek attention. He did not perform miracles. He did not yet preach. He waited. And in that waiting, he prepared. Every day, he saw the struggles of the people, the poor, the sick, the burdened. He saw the oppression of Rome, the religious leaders who added heavy laws upon the people's shoulders. He felt the weight of the world. And he knew what he had come to do. But he also knew God's timing was perfect. The moment had not yet come. And so, he waited. The river that changed everything. One day, the waiting was over. Jesus, now 30 years old, put down his carpenter's tools. He was ready. The Spirit of God stirred within him. The time had come. He left Nazareth and walked to the Jordan River, where a prophet had been preaching, a man named John the Baptist. John was calling people to repentance, telling them that the kingdom of heaven was near. Crowds gathered as he stood in the water, baptizing those who came. And then, Jesus stepped forward. John looked up. His breath caught in his throat. He had been preparing the way for the Messiah, but he never expected to see him here, standing in the river before him. John's voice trembled as he pointed at Jesus. "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." John 1 verse 29. The silence was broken. The hidden years were over. The world would never be the same again. Why this story matters. The story of Jesus' time in Egypt is often overlooked. People talk about his birth in Bethlehem, his miracles, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. But what about the years in between? What happened when Jesus was a child? What did he see? What did he learn? The Bible tells us only a few things about his childhood. But those small details hold great meaning. 1. The Bible confirms Jesus was in Egypt. In Matthew 2 verses 13 to 15, we read how Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fled to Egypt because King Herod wanted to kill the child. This was not a small event, it was a major turning point in Jesus' life. Egypt was a foreign land, a place with different customs, languages, and beliefs. Yet, it became the first home Jesus ever knew. While other children in Israel were playing in the streets of Jerusalem or running through the hills of Nazareth, Jesus was walking along the Nile River, seeing the temples and pyramids, and growing up in a land full of history. God had chosen Egypt to be the place where his son would be protected, shaped, and prepared for what was to come. And this was not an accident. Hundreds of years earlier, another great leader had been in Egypt. His name was Moses. 2. Jesus and Moses, a pattern in history. The story of Jesus as a child in Egypt is deeply connected to the story of Moses. Both were born under the rule of a wicked king who wanted to kill them. Pharaoh tried to kill the Hebrew baby boys, Exodus 1 verse 22, just as Herod tried to kill Jesus, Matthew 2 verse 16. Both were saved by God's plan. Moses was placed in a basket and saved by Pharaoh's daughter. Jesus was taken to Egypt and hidden from Herod. Both left Egypt when the time was right. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt toward the Promised Land. Jesus left Egypt and returned to Israel to begin his journey toward the cross. This was no coincidence. God was showing the world that Jesus was the greater Moses, the one who would save not just Israel, but the whole world. 3. Jesus grew in wisdom. Luke 2 verse 52 tells us something powerful. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. This means that even though Jesus was the Son of God, he still learned and grew like any other child. And where did some of that growth happen? In Egypt. Egypt was one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. It was a land of knowledge, science, medicine, astronomy, and writing. The Great Pyramids, built thousands of years before Jesus' birth, stood as reminders of Egypt's wisdom and power. Did Jesus, as a boy, ask about those pyramids? Did he hear the stories of pharaohs and kings? Did he learn from the scholars who studied the stars and the seasons? We do not know for sure. But we do know that when Jesus began his ministry, his wisdom amazed everyone. The priests were astonished at his understanding. The scribes could not match his knowledge. The Pharisees could not trap him with their trick questions. His words had power. His teachings had depth. And part of that wisdom may have begun forming during those early years in Egypt. 4. The silent years were not wasted. Many people wonder why Jesus waited until he was 30 to begin his ministry. Why not start earlier? Why not perform miracles as a teenager? Because preparation matters. God had a perfect plan. Jesus was not just waiting, he was preparing. He grew in wisdom. He experienced life as a human. He saw suffering, pain, injustice, and oppression. He understood the hearts of people, what they feared, what they longed for, what they needed. So when he finally walked into the Jordan River to be baptized by John, he was ready. The silent years were over. The mission was beginning. 5. Jesus was unlike anyone the world had ever seen. When Jesus began to teach, people knew immediately, he was different. The Pharisees had knowledge, but they lacked power. The priests had tradition, but they lacked love. The Roman rulers had authority, but they lacked truth. But Jesus? He had all of it. Wisdom beyond human understanding. Authority over sickness, demons, and nature. Love that welcomed sinners, healed the broken, and forgave the lost. And it all began in those silent years. 6. Africa played a role in Jesus' story. Many people do not realize that Africa is a key part of Jesus' journey. Africa was a place of refuge for Jesus as a child. Africa was a place of preparation for his mission. Africa was a place that protected the Messiah when his own homeland was too dangerous. This is a powerful reminder that God's plan includes all nations, all people, all places. When Jesus came to save the world, he did not come just for Israel. He came for everyone. Egypt, the land where he once lived, was also included in his salvation. Jesus' years in Africa were not wasted. They were not just silent, they were powerful. He saw things. He learned things. He grew in wisdom, knowledge, and understanding.